I'm a 24-year-old woman, and until a few weeks ago, I genuinely believed I was living inside one of those boring but perfect love stories people brag about on Reddit. You know, the ones: no chaos, no cheating, no screaming fights. Just comfort, consistency, and a man who always knew exactly what to say. We'd been together for almost 3 years. He was charming in a quiet, deliberate way. Not flashy, not loud. The kind of guy who remembers how you take your coffee and texts you good luck before meetings you forgot to tell him about. He called me his calm, told me I made his life make sense. I believed him. God, I believed everything. Looking back, that's what scares me the most: how solid it all felt. We didn't live together, but we spent most weekends at my place. He said his apartment was closer to work, easier during the week. He met my friends. My sister adored him. My mom said he had honest eyes, which feels almost cruel to write now. The first warning signs were so small they barely registered. He hated being tagged on social media. Said he was private. He never posted me, but he didn't post much at all, so I didn't push it. He sometimes disappeared for hours, even days, with explanations that sounded reasonable enough: work trips, family stuff. Needing space to reset, I told myself I was being mature for not questioning him. If you had asked me back then, I would have said we were healthy, balanced, grown up. I didn't know yet that perfect is often just what something looks like right before it cracks. The doubts didn't arrive all at once. They slipped in quietly, dressed as logic. He had rules, boundaries, he called them. I couldn't come over to his place unannounced. In fact, I couldn't really come over at all. He always came to me. When I joked about it, he smiled and said, "You know, I like your space better." It sounded flattering. It felt chosen. Sometimes he would step outside to take calls. Not always, but often enough that I noticed. When I asked who it was, he never snapped or got defensive. That was the thing: he was calm. Always calm. Work, he'd say. Or, "My mom's just stressed again." He said it gently, like I was silly for worrying. He had two phones. One was old, for work apps that didn't transfer properly. I teased him about being a spy. He laughed, kissed my forehead, and said I watched too many thrillers. I laughed too. There were gaps in his stories. Small ones. He'd mention a restaurant he loved, but when I suggested we go, he'd hesitate, then say it was overrated now. He knew streets in parts of the city he claimed he never visited. Once he called me by the wrong name, not another woman's name, just not mine. He corrected himself instantly, looking genuinely embarrassed. I remember lying awake one night, staring at the ceiling, thinking, "You're being paranoid. Don't be that girl." So I wasn't. I swallowed the feeling. I chose trust. The suspicions grew teeth the night I accidentally found a photo that wasn't meant for me. We were sitting on my couch, his head in my lap, scrolling through pictures on his phone from a recent work trip, hotels, conference rooms, bad coffee, normal, boring, safe. I was half paying attention when his thumb slipped. Just for a second, a woman's face filled the screen. It wasn't a selfie. It was intimate in a way that's hard to explain unless you felt it. Soft lighting. Her head tilted toward whoever was taking the photo. She was smiling like she trusted the person behind the camera completely. He froze. "Oh, wait," he said quickly, swiping back. Too quickly. His hand tightened around the phone like it had betrayed him. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just asked, "Who is that?" He didn't miss a beat. "My cousin." The word landed wrong. Not because it was impossible, but because it was too ready, too smooth. I nodded, even smiled. "She's pretty. She's annoying," he said, laughing, leaning up to kiss me like nothing had happened. And somehow, unbelievably, I let him. But later, alone in my bathroom, staring at my own reflection, my stomach twisted. I couldn't explain why, but something inside me knew that picture didn't belong in the category he'd put it in. That was the first night I cried without knowing exactly why. After that night, I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. His schedule was suddenly very structured. Certain evenings were completely off limits. He'd plan dates days in advance, like he needed to book me into his life instead of just being with me. When I asked if we could take a spontaneous trip, he looked almost panicked before masking it with a smile. Not right now. Too much going on. I began checking my phone more than I wanted to admit, watching the gaps between his messages. When he was with me, he was fully present, attentive, affectionate, almost overwhelming in his warmth. But when he wasn't, it felt like I ceased to exist. Once, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. Dinner for two. A place we'd never been together. The date was a night he told me he'd fallen asleep early. I stared at that thin piece of paper like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. When I asked him about it, he sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "I took a client out." I didn't think it was a big deal. I apologized for questioning him. That's the part that hurts the most to write. The actual truth didn't come from snooping the way people warn you about. It came from coincidence, which somehow makes it worse. I was at a friend's engagement party, ironic, I know, standing near the bar, half listening to a conversation behind me. Two women were talking about a mutual friend's fiancé. They said his name at first. I told myself it was common. But then they mentioned his job, his apartment building. The way he hated social media, my chest tightened so hard I thought I might pass out. I turned around slowly and asked, very casually, "Sorry, who are you talking about?" One of them pulled at her phone immediately. This guy. He just proposed last month. The photo loaded, and there he was, my boyfriend, smiling, arm wrapped around the same woman from the photo on his phone. Her hand held up in front of them, a ring catching the light. I remember nodding, saying something polite, and walking to the bathroom on legs that didn't feel like mine. I locked myself in a stall and sat on the floor, staring at the door like it might dissolve. Engaged, not cheating casually. Not a mistake. Alive, I felt stupid, small, like I had accidentally wandered into someone else's story and believed it was mine. I didn't confront him right away. I don't know why. Maybe I needed time to see if the world would correct itself. If the information would somehow become less real if I sat with it long enough. I went home and replayed every moment of our relationship like evidence in a trial. Every canceled plan. Every "I miss you" text sent at strange hours. Every time he told me he wasn't ready for marriage but saw a future with me. When he came over 2 days later, he kissed me like he always did, soft, familiar, loving. It almost broke me. I let him sit on the couch. I let him talk about his day. I let him tell me he'd missed me. Then I said his name and followed it with hers. His face didn't drain of color. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He closed his eyes. That silence told me everything I can explain, he said quietly, like he was asking me to sit through a boring story. Not the demolition of my life. He told me she was from before, that things were complicated, that the engagement didn't mean what it looked like. He said he loved me, said he'd never felt what he felt with me, said I was different. I asked him how long. He hesitated just a fraction of a second, then said, "A few years, several years." The entire time, and somehow, even then, part of me was still listening. After he said it, a few years, something inside me split in two. One part of me was screaming, listing facts like weapons. He lied every day. He built a future with someone else. He let you love him while planning a wedding. That part wanted to throw him out, block him everywhere, text the other woman, burn everything down so the pain had somewhere to go. The other part was quieter, more dangerous. That part remembered the way he held me when I cried about my dad. The way he rubbed circles into my back when I couldn't sleep. The way he looked at me like I was the only calm thing in his life. That part whispered, people are complicated. Love isn't clean. Maybe this isn't what it looks like. I hated myself for listening to that voice. I asked him if he loved her. He didn't answer right away. He said he cared about her, that they had history, that expectations had been placed on him before he knew what he wanted. He said the engagement was easier than the fallout of saying no, Then he looked at me and said, "But you're the one I chose." I felt flattered and disgusted at the same time. I cried. Not dramatically, quietly, like I was afraid of being too much even in the moment my heart was breaking. He held me while I cried. That's another thing that still messes with my head, how comforting he was while being the reason I needed comfort. I loved him. I was furious with him, and I didn't know which feeling was supposed to win. The twist came the next morning, not from him, but from her. I woke up to a message request on Instagram from a woman I didn't follow. Her profile picture made my stomach drop before I even opened the message. It was the same face, soft smile, kind eyes. The ring clearly visible. "I'm sorry to bother you," she wrote, "but I think we need to talk about him." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone down and breathe. Part of me wanted to delete the app, to pretend I'd never seen it. But another part, the one that was tired of guessing, knew this was the moment everything would either become clear or completely unbearable. We moved to texting. She was polite, careful, almost apologetic. She said she'd found a picture of me on his laptop the night before. A picture I remembered taking in my kitchen, laughing at something he'd said. A picture I didn't even know he'd saved. She told me they'd been together for 6 years. They lived together. Had a dog. Their families were planning the wedding, venues, dates, guest lists. She said he traveled a lot for work, but she'd never questioned it because he always came back loving, attentive, reassuring. I realized, with a sick kind of clarity, that he hadn't been juggling a life. He'd been living to complete ones. What broke me wasn't the engagement. It was the details that she sent me photos without meaning to hurt me, just proof, she said, because she needed to be sure I wasn't lying either. Pictures of holidays he told me he hated. A couch I'd never seen, but recognized from the background of his work. Calls they're dog wearing. A collar he'd once joked about wanting to buy. Someday. We compared timelines like survivors of the same accident, trying to understand how we'd both walked away thinking we were alone. On nights he told me he was exhausted and needed space. He was cooking dinner with her. When he told her he was on business trips, he was with me, sleeping in my bed, telling me I felt like home. The most unsettling part, the messages he sent us were almost identical. Same phrases, same reassurances, same promises about the future, just vague enough to mean anything. She asked me if he ever seemed conflicted. I thought about how calm he always was, how steady, how convincing. "No," I typed. He seemed certain. She didn't reply for a long time after that. When I confronted him again, this time with facts instead of feelings, the charm cracked, but it didn't disappear. He didn't deny it. That almost made it worse. He sat there, hands folded, like a man about to negotiate rather than apologize. He said he'd never meant for it to go this far. Said he loved us differently. Said he compartmentalized because that's how he survived pressure. He told me she needed him, that her life was fragile, structured around him. He told me I was strong, independent, capable of handling complex truths that he hadn't told me because he was afraid of losing me. There it was, that subtle shift, making me the resilient one, the one who could carry the weight of his lies without breaking. Then he said something that still echoes in my head. "If I didn't love you, I couldn't have kept this up." I asked him if he was going to marry her. He looked away. "I don't know," he said. "Things are moving fast, moving fast." After 6 years, I realized then that every version of his future still centered on what was easiest for him, not what was honest, not what was kind, just what allowed him to keep everything he wanted for as long as possible. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every word he'd ever said to me, trying to separate the real moments from the scripted ones. I kept asking myself a question that felt impossible to answer. Did he ever love me, or did he just love the way I fit into his life? In the early morning, my phone buzzed again. It was her. She told me she'd confronted him too, that he'd cried, That he'd said he was confused and broken and never meant to hurt anyone. He told her I was just a phase, a mistake, a symptom of his fear of commitment. Reading that felt like being erased in real time. But then she sent another message. He also told me he can't imagine his life without you. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it felt unreal. He had managed to position himself as the victim in both stories. The tragic man torn between two women who just happened to love him too much. She asked me what I was going to do. I stared at the question, realizing I'd been reacting for weeks, but I hadn't actually chosen anything yet, for the first time since this started. The answer felt clear. I told her the truth. All of it. I sent screenshots, dates, messages, voice notes where he whispered things he'd probably whispered to her too. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't add commentary. I just laid out the timeline like evidence in a case I was finally done defending. She thanked me. Not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, exhausted way that felt heavier than anger. She said she needed time, but she was glad she knew. That she felt stupid but also relieved. After that, I blocked him. Everywhere. The urge to leave one line of communication open was strong. A sick part of me wanted him to chase me, to panic, to prove that I mattered more than his lies. But I knew that if I gave him even a crack, he'd crawl back in with apologies polished just enough to make me doubt myself again. Blocking him felt like stepping off a ledge and hoping the ground would appear. It didn't. At first. There were days I missed him so badly it felt physical. I missed the version of him that existed only with me, the man who cooked breakfast in my kitchen, who listened, who felt safe. I had to keep reminding myself that man wasn't separate from the one who lied. He was part of the same whole. That was the hardest truth to accept. A week later, the final twist arrived. She messaged me one last time. She said she'd moved out, canceled the venue, told their families. He'd begged, promised therapy, swore he'd change. She said watching him unravel felt surreal, like seeing behind a curtain she hadn't known existed. Then she sent one sentence that closed something inside me. He told me he thought he could love two women without losing either. That was it. Not confusion, not fear, entitlement. I realized then that there was no version of this story where he suddenly became honest. Even when exposed, he still framed it as a tragic misunderstanding instead of a deliberate choice he made every single day. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt done. I've started telling people the truth now. Not the softened version. Not the one that makes it easier for them to digest. I say he was living a double life, and I let the silence sit after. Some days, I still question myself. I wonder if I could have seen it earlier, if I ignored my instincts because I wanted the story to be simple. I wonder how someone can look you in the eyes and lie so gently that it feels like love. But I don't wonder if I made the right choice anymore. Love shouldn't require detective work. It shouldn't feel like you're constantly justifying someone else's behavior to yourself. And it definitely shouldn't leave you questioning your own sanity. If there's anything I've learned, it's that trust isn't about how convincing someone is, it's about consistency, transparency, and how safe you feel asking hard questions. He taught me what manipulation looks like when it's wrapped in charm and tenderness. He taught me that being chosen by someone who refuses to choose honestly is not a compliment. I don't know what happens to him now. I don't want to know. I'm grieving a relationship that felt real, even if it was built on lies. And I'm learning to forgive myself for believing in it. If you're reading this and something in your chest feels tight because it sounds familiar, listen to that feeling. It's not paranoia. It's your intuition asking to be taken seriously. And next time, I will.